A long white bus stopped at a small village road. The bus was noisy and full of dust. A young woman came down from the bus. Her name was Ngozi. She wore her green and white NYSC uniform. She looked happy but a little tired. Ngozi carried 2 bags. One on her back and one in her hand. She looked around. "Is this Idukpe village?" she asked the driver. "Yes, this is it," the driver said. Ngozi smiled. "Thank you." The driver waved and the bus drove away. Ngozi stood alone. She looked around. There were no big houses, no cars, and no shops. She saw mud houses, goats walking around, and small children playing in the sand. One small boy came to her. He had a big smile and no shoes. "Auntie Korpa, are you the new teacher?" "Yes," Ngozi said, smiling. "Can you take me to the school?" "Yes." "Follow me," the boy said happily. As Ngozi walked with the boy, some villagers came out of their homes. Some waved. Some just looked at her. 2 old women stood near a tree. "She looks like a wheel," one of them said. "Don't say that name," the other replied. Ngozi didn't hear them. She was looking at the big trees, the red sand, and the green hills far away. Everything was quiet. Everything was new. Soon, they reached the village school. It was a small building with children's drawings on the wall. An old man with glasses came out. "Welcome. Welcome," he said. "I am the headmaster. My name is Mr. Ease. You must be Korpa Ngozi." "Yes, sir," Ngozi said. "We are happy to have you. You will teach English here. Another NYSC Korpa is here too. His name is David. You will meet him later. Come, let me show you your room." Ngozi followed him to a small house beside the school. Inside her room, there was a bed, a chair, and a small table. The window looked out at a big forest. That night, Ngozi sat outside. The moon was bright. She wrote in her diary, "Today I came to Idukpe village. It is very quiet here. The people are nice, but the place is strange. A little boy said I look like a ghost. I don't know what that means. Tomorrow, I will start teaching. I hope I can sleep well tonight." Suddenly, she heard a voice. "Hello. You must be Ngozi." She looked up. A young man stood near her. He wore a NYSC uniform too. He had a kind smile. "I'm David," he said. "I'm a teacher here too." Ngozi smiled. "Nice to meet you, David." They sat and talked. David told her about the village. He said there were many old stories. "Some people say the forest is full of spirits," David said. Ngozi laughed. "Do you believe in ghosts?" David smiled. "I believe old stories are not always just stories." Ngozi laughed again. She didn't believe in ghosts. That night, she went to bed. But she had a strange dream. She saw a woman in the forest. The woman wore a red wrapper. She had no shoes. She was crying. The woman looked at Ngozi and said, "Help me." They lied. They killed me. Ngozi woke up screaming. She was sweating. Her bed sheet was on the floor. Her window was open. But she had locked it. She looked at her feet. They were dirty. Full of red sand. She looked at her table. There was something there. A white feather. Ngozi didn't have a feather. She picked it up slowly. Then, something happened. Her eyes rolled back. She dropped the feather. She started to speak. But the words were not in English. They were not in any language she knew. Outside her room, David was passing by. He heard her strange voice. He rushed to her door and opened it. But when he entered the room, David stood in the room, confused and scared. "Ngozi," he called. No answer. The bed was empty. The window was wide open. The white feather was still floating in the air. It slowly fell to the floor. David ran to the window and looked outside. He saw footprints in the sand, bare feet, walking toward the forest. Why would she go into the forest at night? David asked himself. He grabbed a torchlight and followed the footprints. The night was dark and cold. Crickets were singing. The trees were big and scary. David's heart was beating fast. "Please be okay, Ngozi," he whispered. As he walked deeper into the forest, he saw something strange. A soft light was shining between the trees. He followed the light. Then he saw her. Ngozi was standing under a big tree. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were in the air. She was wearing her white NYSC shirt, but her face looked different. She was not smiling. She looked like she was crying. Around her, white feathers floated in the air. They moved like they were alive. David slowly walked closer. "Ngozi," he said. She didn't move. "Ngozi, it's me, David. Can you hear me?" Suddenly, she opened her eyes. But her eyes were white. All white. No black in them. David stepped back. "Ngozi," he said again, now afraid. Ngozi looked at him. She spoke. But her voice was not her voice. It was deeper. Older. Sad. "She must help me," the voice said. David froze. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The voice said, "They left me here. They forgot me. But she is like me. She must help me." Then, Ngozi fainted. David ran and caught her before she hit the ground. He looked around. The white feathers were gone. The light was gone too. He carried Ngozi back to her room. When she woke up the next morning, she didn't remember anything. "I was in the forest?" she asked, shocked. "Yes," David said. "I don't remember leaving my bed," she said. "I had a dream. A woman was crying. She wanted help." David nodded. "I saw her too. But she was inside you." Ngozi looked at him. "What are you saying? You were talking in a different voice. Like someone else was using your body." Ngozi started shaking. No. This can't be real." David put his hand on her shoulder. "We need help. There's something going on in this village. Something old. Something the elders are hiding." Ngozi looked out the window toward the forest. "I think the woman in my dream is real," she said quietly. "She's calling me. She needs something." David nodded. "Then we must find out who she is." That day, they went to see the oldest woman in the village. Her name was Mama Ife. She was almost 100 years old. Her face had many lines, and her back was bent like a walking stick. When they entered her compound, she was sitting on a mat, grinding pepper with a stone. "Mama Ife, good afternoon," David greeted. "Good afternoon, children," she said slowly. Her voice was soft like wind. "I know why you are here." "You do?" Ngozi asked. Mama Ife looked at her with sad eyes. "You saw her, didn't you?" Ngozi's eyes grew wide. "You mean, the woman in the forest?" Mama Ife nodded. "Her name was Awil. Many years ago, she lived in this village. She was a kind girl. But something terrible happened to her." "What happened?" David asked. Mama Ife looked around and whispered, "She fell in love with the wrong man. The village didn't like it. They did something bad. They tried to hide it. But now, her spirit is crying." Ngozi held her chest. "Why me? Why did she choose me?" "Because you look like her," Mama Ife said. "And your heart is pure. She wants you to help her." "How do I help her?" Ngozi asked. Mama Ife looked afraid. "I don't know. But be careful. Some people in this village don't want the truth to come out." Suddenly, a strong wind blew. Dust and leaves flew into the air. Mama Ife looked up. Her eyes turned dark. Her voice changed. "She is coming," she said. "She is angry. And she is not alone." Ngozi and David sat on a bench under a tree. The wind blew gently, and birds sang in the sky. But their hearts were not calm. Mama Ife's words still rang in their ears. She is coming. She is angry. And she is not alone. What does that even mean? Ngozi asked softly. David looked worried. I think it means something big is going to happen. Maybe more than just the spirit of a wheel. Ngozi looked down at her hands. I don't want to be part of this. I just came here to teach. I didn't come here to see ghosts. I know, David said kindly. But maybe this spirit chose you for a reason. Ngozi shook her head. Why can't she just talk to someone else? David smiled. Because you are strong. And brave. Ngozi looked at him and smiled too. But deep inside, she was scared. The next morning, Ngozi went to class. Her students were already waiting. The children liked her. She told funny stories and taught them how to read and write. Good morning, class, she said. Good morning, Auntie Corpa, they shouted with big smiles. Everything seemed fine, until she opened the classroom cupboard to get some chalk. She screamed. Inside the cupboard was a small wooden doll. Its eyes were painted red. It had tiny beads around its neck. It was holding a small feather, just like the one from her room. She dropped the chalk. The children gasped. Auntie, what is that? One boy asked. I don't know, Ngozi whispered. David heard the scream and ran into the classroom. He saw the doll and his face changed. That's not just a doll, he said. That's a warning. A warning? Ngozi asked. Yes. I've seen one like that before, David said. In a book about village spirits. They took the doll outside and buried it behind the school. But the strange things didn't stop. That night, Ngozi heard someone crying again. She looked outside her window. And saw a girl in a red wrapper standing near the forest. The same girl from her dreams. The same girl from the forest. This time, Ngozi didn't faint. She got up and walked to the window. The girl looked up. Her eyes were full of tears. Please, help me, the girl said in a soft voice. Ngozi whispered, Who are you? The girl said, I am a wheel. They took my love. They told lies. They made me vanish. Now you must bring the truth. Then, she disappeared. The next day, Ngozi and David went to the village library. It was small and dusty. No one used it much. They searched for old books about the village. After hours of looking, David pulled out a thick book with brown pages. I found something, he said. The book was full of pictures and names of old villagers. Then, they saw a photo. It was a young woman in a red wrapper. Her name was written under the photo. Awil Chika. 1973, missing. Never found. That's her. Ngozi shouted. That's the girl from the forest. David turned the page. And then he saw something that made his heart stop. Right beside Awil's photo was a photo of a young man. His name was Chika. Under his name, it said, married to another. Last seen with Awil. David whispered, That's my grandfather's name. Ngozi looked at him, shocked. What does that mean? She asked. David closed the book slowly. It means my family is part of this story. David sat on the floor of the library. He was still holding the old book. He could not believe what he just read. My grandfather knew Awil? He asked himself. Ngozi sat beside him. She looked worried. David, she said softly. If your grandfather was the last person seen with Awil, maybe he knows what happened to her. David slowly nodded. But my grandfather died many years ago. My father never talked about him. They closed the book and left the library. The sun was setting. The sky turned orange, and the birds flew back to their trees. That night, David could not sleep. He kept thinking about Awil. He kept hearing her voice in his head. They took my love. They told lies. They made me vanish. The next morning, David and Ngozi went to see David's uncle. He was the only one still alive from that side of the family. His name was Uncle Ikena. He lived in a small house near the edge of the village. He was an old man with gray hair and sharp eyes. When he saw David, he smiled. "Ah, my brother's son. What brings you here?" David and Ngozi sat down. "Uncle," David said, "do you remember someone called Awil?" Uncle Ikena's smile disappeared. He looked down and stayed quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Where did you hear that name?" David said, "We found her picture in the library. She disappeared a long time ago. And the book says she was last seen with Grandfather Cheka." Uncle Ikena took a deep breath. "Yes," he said. "Awil was real. She was a beautiful girl. She and your grandfather were in love." Ngozi leaned in. "What happened to her?" Uncle Ikena looked afraid. "They were not allowed to be together. Awil came from a poor family. Our family was rich. The elders said she was not good enough for Cheka. They wanted him to marry another girl from a big family." David asked, "So what did grandfather do?" "He tried to fight it," Uncle said. "He loved Awil very much. He wanted to marry her. But the elders did something wicked. They told lies about Awil. They said she was a witch. That she had a dark spirit. The people believed it. One night, she was taken into the forest." Ngozi gasped. "Taken? By who?" "The village guards," Uncle said. "They said she must be cleansed. But she never came back." David's hands were shaking. "So, she was killed?" Uncle Ikena nodded slowly. "That's what many believe. But no one ever found her body. After that, strange things started happening in the village. The forest became dark. People got sick. And the elders made everyone stop talking about her." Ngozi whispered, "That's why her spirit is not resting. She wants the truth to come out." Uncle Ikena looked at Ngozi with wide eyes. "You've seen her, haven't you?" Ngozi nodded. "She came to me in a dream. And I think she entered my body." Uncle Ikena stood up. "You must be very careful. If the wrong people find out, they will try to stop you." David stood too. "We need to find her body. Maybe that will help her spirit rest." Uncle Ikena looked serious. "Go to the old shrine near the forest. That was the last place she was taken." Ngozi and David thanked him and left. Later that evening, they walked into the forest. The trees were tall and quiet. Birds stopped singing. Everything felt still. Soon, they reached the old shrine. It was small and broken. The roof had fallen in. The floor was covered with leaves and mud. They stepped inside carefully. Suddenly, the air grew cold. Ngozi touched the wall. It was wet. Then she saw something. A small bracelet, half buried in the mud. It had little red beads. She picked it up. As soon as she did, a loud cry came from the trees. Ngozi and David turned around fast. The forest was dark. Then, Awil, standing not far away. Hope you enjoyed the story, but I'm certain you will enjoy the next story. Subscribe to this channel for more interesting tales. Share, like and comment.